Hi, and welcome back to Exhibit Extras, where we take you behind the scenes of our exhibit making process and through some of our exhibits. So today we're here with our esteemed leader, Executive Director Ann Mason, and we are in the Washington County History Museum in the Jonesborough Visitors Center, where we had our circus exhibit videos the last time. So Ann is going to tell us about another new exhibit that is in the museum here. So I'll just turn it over to you.
Yeah, so in addition to the circus exhibit, we have A Tale of Three Houses, which you can see behind us here. And this exhibit is really unique because it involves found objects, and it's also about houses. It's house specific. It's about three houses that are very different, but actually have a lot in common too, out in the Telford community. So we always like when we can bring stories from other parts of Washington County, like Telford, to the Washington County History Museum. So it's just not all Jonesborough or Johnson City, but it's these other communities as well. So this talks about the Embry House, the Kiker House, and the Wassam House in Telford. Now the Embry House is the oldest. It is actually a late 1700s stone house. You probably know the name Embry because Elihu Embry, who lived in that house when he was growing up, published the first all-abolitionist newspaper in the world, The Emancipator, in 1820. Then the Kiker House is really different. It is a concrete block house that had, like a frame outside put on it, and it dates to the 1950s. And then the Wassam House is a brick structure that was built probably in the mid to late 1820s. They're all kind of like on the same, what was once kind of same property, but was divided up over time. And we were able to actually take objects out of these houses to display in this exhibit. And that's thanks to Patrick and Patricia Stern, who are members of the Heritage Alliance. They have worked to preserve these houses. They actually do agro-tourism out of it. So it's a B&B, you can go and stay in, you can check out the farm. It's really cool. And they found all these things when they were renovating the houses, and so they let us put them on display in the museum.
All right, so we're going to transition over here to one of the other cases. The exhibit is kind of spread to a different couple parts of the museum. So we're going to look at a couple of the cases and talk about found objects and how found objects can work their way into exhibits. And in this case, really make up a whole big portion of the exhibit.
Yeah.
So, all right, so we're going to talk about some found objects. So Ann, first, is there anything that just jumps out to you as really interesting that is a found object?
So this one exhibit, literally Patrick Stern took us in and was like, I have all this stuff I found in the house, especially the Wassam House, because no one had actively lived in it for 50 years. And they had just stored their stuff there. And when the Sterns got the house, I was like, you get the house and all the stuff has been stored in it for 50 years. It's all yours now.
Yes.
But there's some really cool stuff in all of that that helps tell the history of the house and the history of the Wassam family. So I tried to, with found objects to get a variety of materials that go into making a life. That's why I love these exhibits, because it's really what goes into your house, what goes into making your life. So there's some essentially doilies and needlepoint kind of situation over here. I love the postcards, one because the color has held up so well with time, but also Ida Wassam was the postmaster in Telford for a long time, who lived in the house. So there was a whole lot of post office stuff actually in the house, because that was her career. Horseshoes, because it was an active farm. My favorite thing is this little straw dog. Now, it has seen better days, but I love this little toy, and I wonder what kid played with it, and at what point did it get shoved under the bed and forgotten. So I love the little straw dog. And then the house too, and you kind of see it behind us, had this beautiful, amazing, crazy quilt from the early 1900s. It has all the initials of the Wassam family sewn into it, who were alive at the time. And it's held up well, and it was in a drawer for 50 years. So being able to pull these things out of hiding and show them off again, because that was meant to be a showpiece, and now it's back out on show. So I really love when you get these little pieces of everyday life that help tell the story. And we've got artifacts here that range in time, some of them are from the indigenous people who lived on the land before the settlers moved in. Obviously some of these are 20th century artifacts, some are 1800s. So it really tells the scope of the history on this land.
Yeah, and I think my favorite would be the postcard as well. They are really bright, and especially for how old they are. Their color did hold up really well. Plus, they're really interesting. You can just tell stylistically that they're, not modern postcards. Do you want to explain just briefly what a crazy quilt is?
Yeah.
For those of you that might not know
Yeah.
what a crazy quilt is.
So a crazy quilt, this was a quilting trend that was really popular in the late 1800s, early 19th century. Late 1800s, early 20th century is like that era there.
Yeah.
And really it was you would take pieces of fabric that you had and put them all together for a quilt.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's called a crazy quilt because nothing really matches. You intentionally use different stitches, you intentionally use different kinds of thread, but people would really use crazy quilts to help tell a story. Like usually you find initials on it, usually you find a date. Sometimes you'd have like, if they were making it for a specific person, they'd put in like their favorite bird or their favorite flower. You can learn a whole lot from a crazy quilt depending on who made it, and like just the amount of initials on this one are like there's a whole lot of people who were accounted for on this crazy quilt. But yeah, it's just a mishmash of all the fabrics that were left over from other quilts or other projects, and you put them together in a crazy quilt.
Yeah, you just the way that this is displayed, you don't see the full quilt, and there's at least 10 people represented on it. So.
Yeah, we don't have a way to display the full quilt right here, unfortunately. But just from what you can see, you got a whole lot of history going on.
Yeah, for sure. So let's go look at our other case that we found items. So the items in this case are mostly intact.
Mostly intact, yeah. We're missing a few pieces, but pretty much they're all intact. So
like the dog, not in the best condition, but it's a dog. You know what it is.
So it's a dog.
We're going to look at another case that has items that are not necessarily intact. So we're going to talk about that and how you can work with broken objects and how that's sometimes really difficult. But let's go look at that one.
Yeah.
So now we're going to talk about items that are in the exhibit that were found items, but also not intact. So what do you want to point out first? How interesting it is to work with items like that, or how hard it is to work with items like that?
It's both. I mean, it's fun because they're little bits and pieces, but also like how do you tell a story with bits and pieces as opposed to like a full-fledged artifact. So these all came from the Embry House actually, and it came from the lower level, which they believe were enslaved quarters at one point during the house's history. And they all came from like one spot. So that was probably honestly like the refuse pile, the trash hole. Because you got a whole bunch of broken pieces of pottery and then like bits and pieces of shoes. So we almost actually you almost have like almost like a full plate here, but it's still missing some pieces. But clearly they broke a lot of dishes over the time that whoever was living there was living there. You got a whole bunch of different patterns, different kinds. And then also, I love the shoes. So you've got this like a sole for like an adult shoe and like a kid's shoe. And like bits and pieces of the shoes. So, when you wear through your shoes, you just throw them in the refuse hole. Yeah. So you wonder about why were the things like thrown there? Did somebody accidentally drop them? I mean, exactly what was that space used for? Yeah. But stands to reason it was some sort of at one point trash receptacle. So, once the Stearns started digging, all of this started coming up. And you find that, in most places you find the place where everyone kind of dumped their trash, which is a great historical value.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. So you mentioned a lot of like where you find things. Where does it seem like most houses, like if you moved into a historic home, like where would you be most likely to find like just a treasure trove of trash from someone's past or any of this stuff? Like where do you typically find that stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. It depends. Like the Wassam House was a unique case where they'd stored stuff in there for 50 years and just walked away from it. Yeah. Which still happens in some places. People just walk away from it because there's no one left in the family who can take care of it. Yeah. Still though, if you get an old house, it comes with a trunk. When you check out that trunk,
yes.
A lot of people when they do work in old homes, be careful. Obviously, we'll be careful when you take down walls. But people would put things in the walls for like safekeeping or like as like a essentially like a time capsule for whoever's coming next. So a lot of people find things in the walls. I just heard of a local house they found a 1940s World War II bomber jacket that one of the previous tenants had left in the wall as like a, hey, we lived here.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, right? So, look at your walls. Don't go through, tear all your walls down, but if you do demo. Some people find them in fireplaces. And usually every house had some spot in the yard where they were going to dump their trash. And you find a lot of stuff when you find that, like, cachet. So.
Yeah. And that happens a lot, especially in older homes. Like, before you had, if you're living in Telford in 1850, you probably didn't have, like, regular trash pickup. Yeah. So, finding spots like that. We did a found object exhibit at the Chester Inn. and a lot of stuff came from the crawl space.
Yeah,
those
crawl
sorts of things.
spaces.
So there are a lot of different places that you can find things, and so this part of the exhibit's really interesting because it's not necessarily things, especially if the people that had left this stuff or broke the item or set it aside in the trash, there's no way that they would have expected this to be in a museum.
No.
And they wouldn't have expected it to be of any sort of value of any
No,
kind.
like that's my broken shoe. What?
Yes.
What?
Yeah. So anytime that I see things like this, I just tend to think about, okay, what have I thrown out that some historian might be throwing in a museum? But another interesting item that is not in a display case because it's too big is also part of this collection, and it's actually just kind of sitting on the floor. We don't have another spot for it because it is extremely heavy.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about that item?
Yeah. So it's like a whole. What best we can discern is it's like this whole metal iron contraption. We think it was like the front two wheels of a yoke that you'd hook to an animal, like so they would pull like the wagon.
Yes.
We think it's that piece, and the wood has rotted away over time. And at some point, like I guess the cart was abandoned, and the wood rots away. Nature reclaims it because the Stearns literally, when they were like doing metal detecting, pulled it out of the ground. Like these giant iron wheels pulled it out of the ground. And just like how long ago was that abandoned for that to happen? But yeah, we have like this massive these ironworks that they found on the ground.
And it really is the first picture that Anne sent to me of it, like. Just without any context, it looked like a bike. It's almost like when you unfold it and lay it out, it kind of looks like a very weird bicycle.
Yeah.
But it is really hard to state just how heavy it is and
heavy.
how hard it was to sort of display. So this, I guess, this will be the last thing to talk about. Do you want to talk about displaying large items that and finding ways to work items in to an exhibit that you don't really have like display space for? So how do you work with something like that?
Well, I like to call this museum the Museum of Large Artifacts that have no other home because we have high ceilings.
Yes.
So with large objects, rarely do you have a case big enough. When we first got that iron piece, when I saw it, I was like, oh, we'll just lift it over the rail.
Yeah.
Not gonna happen. We're not that
No
strong.
way.
We're not those people. So we had to like find a base for it to sit on that was sturdy enough, and then also be sure it was out of the way of foot traffic because we don't want people tripping over it. So yeah, really with large objects, it doesn't mean you can't display them. We've had large objects out here before on the floor, but you do have to find a way to keep. If you don't want people to touch them, you got to keep people from touching them, and then make sure too that you have a good flow of traffic. So you protect the guest and you protect the artifacts.
Yes.
They do come with mobility issues, so like get you a good hand truck and some, a dolly and just take your time in moving them because they usually are very heavy pieces.
Yes. And if possible, try to find a way to not have it sitting on just straight directly on the floor.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you could put it on something else, like even if it's just like a blanket or like a piece of cardboard under it, so you can protect your flooring.
Now, some items that are so large, like, we have the fire equipment in here, like, those are designed to go on the floor, that's fine. Even then, they're sort of raised on the platform.
They used to be straight on the floor, but we've built them on platforms since then. And then we have the World War I trench mortar that when the town of Jonesborough was like, we're bringing you this trench mortar, we're like, put it on wheels.
Yes.
Because it's literally a giant weapon of iron.
Yes,
it needs to be on wheels.
Yes. But this item is not permanent collection. It's not going to stay in this exhibit. So we have it on, I guess, a modified dolly.
It's like a dolly,
But this exhibit's a really good example of different types of items and different ways to display things.
Yeah, and again, we're really thankful to the Stern family for letting us borrow these items and for letting us tell the story of these houses. And we got this exhibit up through the end of 2021, so come and check it out.
Yeah, and that's what we do. We tell stories when we make exhibits.
Yeah, that's what we do with the big objects and small objects.
Yes, very sure. So, but that's it. That's it for this exhibit extra. Come in to the museum, especially if I haven't been here in a while. It's a lot of different things out on the floor. 2 exhibits that are relatively new that are going to be up, both of them through the end of the year at least. So a lot of cool stuff to check out. Thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to check us out on Facebook and YouTube at the Chester Inn and follow along with us.
Yeah.
Thanks.